So here we are, folks, approaching 1 year since President Trump's monumental, ground-shaking, earth-shattering decision to issue an executive order which would grant refugee status to South Africans fleeing from racial persecution. Of course, over the past year, we've seen repeated fake news, even again yesterday in the New York Times, fraudulently claiming that the program's for white South Africans. That's simply untrue. The media refuses to report the truth, despite the fact that I have repeatedly interviewed non-white South Africans, had them on camera, who are in the United States, despite the fact that since the 10th of February 2025, U.S. Embassy website in South Africa has clearly stated that this program is for Afrikaners and racial minorities in South Africa. It's as simple as that. But they refuse to report the truth. Why? What is the agenda here? Well, part of it clearly is Trump derangement syndrome. But frankly, the rest of it just seems to be bigotry and hatred against white South Africans, which continues, which only confirms their concerns about the persecution they're facing in South Africa. So where do we sit? From May 12th, when the first of the 59ers, the proof of concept pilot program, when they landed in the States on the 12th of May, 59 of them, almost half children under the age of 18. Since then, the total number has ratcheted up to 1,055 through December 31st of 2025. Bear in mind, the program wasn't funded. The State Department had to rob Peter to pay Paul to find funding because President Trump had frozen those funds for a period of time. Then the government went through a shutdown, which affected the refugee program from around the 26th of September until about the 17th of November, when flights finally landed back in the States. Given all those disruptions and the fact that this is in-country refugee program, which is unusual but not unprecedented, it's not something the United States does on a daily basis, but we have done it in the past. For instance, we've done it in Bosnia-Herzegovina. We've done it in Cuba. I've even talked to a Cuban refugee here in Harrisburg, who's one of those who benefited from this program for in-country refugee status. Now we're doing it in South Africa. So it's a bit different. Also, South Africa is a relatively developed country, not a war-torn zone. And so people who don't understand what persecution is, who don't understand what a refugee is, consistently badmouth the program and lie about it. For instance, we have a DRC refugee who lives in Twin Falls, Idaho, working at the Chobani yogurt factory, whose feelings are hurt. Well, no, he doesn't work there. His wife works there. His feelings are hurt, and he claims the South Africans who are in Twin Falls aren't real refugees. Well, dude, you're just an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. So I guess he thinks only black people or poor people or people fleeing from war zones are refugees. Clearly, that's not the case. The 95,000 Jews who fled after Kristallnacht in Germany in the late 1930s to come to the United States, many of whom were wealthy business owners. Should they have been excluded because they were wealthy, because they were white? What about 300,000 Ukrainians dumped on our shores who are white Christians? Should they have been excluded? No, utter nonsense. So what's happening? Well, the pace has been picking up significantly since January 5th. As I reported, my prediction, my analysis turns out to be correct. On January 5th, at least 50 refugees flew and landed on 6th of January, which is the date I said it would likely restart. Since that date, the pace has picked up. For the past 2 weeks or so, there's been an average of 120 refugees per day coming to the United States. So when the government releases its total figures early February, we'll see the number more than double most likely, or go even higher for those already here. Now, I have independent sources who claim that the government intends to ratchet this up from the 1,000 that they were projecting for January, which clearly they've surpassed, to 2,000 for February, which it seems quite easy to achieve. And that would take the number from 1 to 2 to 4,000 at a minimum, probably more than that. And then the plan is to bring 4,000 per month after that. Now, I'm a little bit suspect on that 4,000 per month after that, because the current cap or goal for this year is just 7,000 from South Africa, 500 from the rest of the world. With that in mind, that would mean that they would exceed that already by the end of March, early April at the latest, long before the fiscal year ends. If that's true, we'll have to wait and see if the Trump administration does as I predicted they're likely to do, because the actions of South Africa, the continued persecution, the subterfuge, the lies, the actions of South Africa contrary to international norms and the rules-based order, Donald Trump is likely to revise that figure if it's possible. So here we are. There are still pundits and commentators in South Africa lying about the program, saying that less than 1,000 people have come over, without putting context in the program. Given the nature of processing refugees and the intensive vetting that takes place, the fact that anyone's over here after such a short period of time is quite impressive, to say the least. But people still denigrate the program and still lie about it. Why? Because they have vested interest. Every South African that leaves South Africa, most of them, are taxpayers. and the eroding the tax base of South Africa's government. SARS is becoming poorer by the day. Now, this is on top of approximately 82 South Africans who leave the country every day of their own volition to move elsewhere because of race-based legislation that prevents them from getting jobs, because the abysmal employment environment where 40% of the South Africans are unable to work. They leave because of violent crime. They go to New Zealand, to Australia, to Canada, to Germany, to France, to Japan, to the United Kingdom, elsewhere. This is a serious brain drain for South Africa. Now, likely 200 or more South Africans leave the country every single day. This can't continue indefinitely. Something has to break. Either the government reforms, or the people vote these people out, or the country implodes. The last one is not a pretty look. But the bottom line here is the number of refugees coming to the United States is exploding from South Africa while it's frozen for the rest of the world. What say you, South Africa? Mzansi. Cheers.